Welcome to this GCSE Sociology warm-up session for Paper 1. We have produced two videos to help with your last-minute preparations for the Paper 1 exam on Monday. This one focuses on the sociology of families and the other one will focus on the sociology of education. So let's remind ourselves of the most basic information about this exam. You will sit it on the afternoon of Monday the 16th of May and it lasts for an hour and 45 minutes. It covers the sociology of families and education, and there will be some research methods included too. Hopefully you are familiar with the advanced information for the higher tariff questions in this paper. They cover family forms, how family forms differ in the UK and within a global context, divorce, changes in the pattern of divorce in Britain since 1945 and the consequences of divorce for family members and structures, roles and functions of education and the views from the different perspectives on this, and processes within schools that affect educational achievement. Please remember advanced information is about the higher tariff questions though. Anything from the rest of the spec could be covered in those lower tariff questions. So we know what the focus of the higher tariff questions will be, but let's remind ourselves of the topics that could be tested in the low tariff questions. When studying families, you will have covered the function of families. Think about the work of Parsons and Murdoch here. Family forms, conjugal role relationships, such as Warmup and Young, changing relationships in the family, and criticisms of the family. Think about the feminist perspective, in particular the work of Oakley, and then divorce. In the education unit, you will have covered roles and functions of education. So again, think about Durkheim and Davis and Moore, the relationship between education and capitalism, so looking at Bowes and Gintes, but also marketisation. So think about Ball, Bow and Gertwitz, and education achievement and the processes within schools, looking at things like labelling theory and anti-school subcultures. Throughout the paper, there will be some questions about sociological research methods, and some of those might be in reference to key studies. Right, let's start to focus on the advanced information topics for the family unit. Our first one is family forms and how they differ within the UK and within a global context. This includes family forms in the UK, family forms across the globe, family diversity and the work of the Rappaports, and perspectives on family forms. We're going to start off by reminding ourselves of the family forms that we see in the UK. Each of the family forms you are about to see has had their vowels changed to an alternative vowel. Can you work them out? Good luck. Okay, here is our first one. Okay, have you got it? It is nuclear. The nuclear family is seen as the ideal family type in Britain. It consists of two generations, male and female parents and their children, either their own or adopted. It has been presented both as the best and the normal family type, when it is actually one of many different family types. Okay, here is our next one. Okay, hopefully you've worked it out. It is single-sex families. These are more common today and they consist of a couple of the same sex who might be living together or in a civil partnership or since 2014 married. The Marriage and Same-Sex Couples Act in 2013 allows same-sex couples to marry in civil ceremonies. Same-sex couples in the UK have the right to adopt, or have had the right to adopt, since 2002 following the Adoption and Children Act of that year. Okay, our next one. Right, have you worked this one out? So this one is lone parent. So a lone parent family is one parent, mother or father with their dependent children, and they are increasing in Britain. About 25% of families with dependent children are lone parent families, and about 90% of these are headed by a female. Previously, lone parent families were mainly down to the death of one parent or a separation where one partner left, although this would have been frowned upon at the time. But there are more lone parents today, more lone parent families today, which are either the result of divorce or the end of a relationship, or just women choosing to have children on their own. Okay, here is our fourth one. Okay, did you get blended families, which are also known as reconstituted families? These are those that are formed when divorced or separated people meet new partners, and it is a joining together of two families, for example, children becoming stepchildren. There are now more blended families in the UK than nuclear families. Okay, we have our last one. Okay, have you worked this one out? So we have extended families here. Many people in the UK live in extended families, and they're also common in many other countries such as India and across Africa in tribal communities. The extended family consists of relatives as well as the immediate family. They can be vertically extended, so you've got 3 or more generations living together or very nearby, so children, parents and grandparents for example, or they can be horizontally extended, so 2 generations with relatives other than the immediate family living together or nearby, so it might be cousins, aunts and uncles in this case. So we've covered UK family forms. Let's think about what's going on with families in other countries. Cultural relativity is the idea that people in different cultures have different customs, traditions, norms and values. So things that we consider to be normal in our own culture may be considered immoral or wrong by people in other cultures and vice versa. This is reflected in some of the family forms found across the globe. So let's have a look at some of them in a bit more detail. Polygamy refers to a marriage where one partner is allowed to legally marry several partners at the same time. It is most common for a man to have several wives. This practice is found in many small traditional societies, particularly in Northern Africa and the Middle East, but it is usually only wealthy men who practice it as they need to be rich enough to support all of their wives. Women in these societies often regard the practice as unfair, but in such patriarchal systems they are unlikely to have much choice in the matter. It is also thought to exist widely in Utah and the USA through the Mormon faith, although this is far less common now. Polyandry is a custom where women may marry several men at the same time, although this is quite rare and might have been a custom in societies where there was a shortage of men. In some areas of Nepal, it is a custom for a woman to marry all the brothers from one family, even if some of the brothers are very young. Wives are expected not to show favouritism and to have at least one child from each father. In comparison, in the UK, we practice monogamy. UK law states that men and women can only have one marriage partner at a time, and the Church encourages this to be for life. However, serial monogamy is becoming more common. If you have more than one marriage partner at a time, you are committing bigamy, which is a crime. So we're going to use the on-balance activity to evaluate polygamy as a global family form. We'd like you to try to come up with 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages of this type of relationship. Let's start with the advantages. You might want to pause the video for a few moments to give yourself some thinking time. So how did you do? So firstly, these families often have more money because there are more adults working, so more money for food, rent, household bills, as well as luxuries. But it also means the death of a parent is far less likely to plunge a family into poverty, which often happens. Additionally, all women take care of all of the children, not just their biological children, so childcare is less of an issue. And household chores are spread out among more people, so there's less pressure on individuals and women have time for other things rather than just housework. Okay, can you now do the same for the disadvantages of polygamy? Let's have a look at what you came up with. Many people argue that polygamy is unnatural, but remember what we said about cultural relativity a few moments ago. Just because it's not normal in our culture doesn't necessarily make it wrong. However, one issue is the fact that jealousy can become a big problem. In some cultures, younger wives are servants of the oldest wife, and in others, older wives have no say when younger wives are being brought into the family home. So remember, if you are asked a question about global family forms, you need to present a balanced opinion like we have in this activity. We also need to consider the decisions that affect family forms and organisation. Arranged marriages exist in some societies. In these situations, parents organise their children's marriages, they choose their children's spouses who are often quite unknown to each other, and the marriage is usually arranged between families of similar economic and social standing, and is seen as a union of the 2 families rather than just a love match, though it is hoped that love will develop over time. The practice is particularly common in India and Pakistan and among these ethnic communities within the UK. There are lots of advantages to an arranged marriage. Partners often fall in love after they marry. Older people choose carefully for their children. Children are able to meet and accept or reject whoever their parents have chosen. And divorce is rare because people are quite realistic about what marriage means. But of course, you don't know your partner and you might not like them. It is really important here to highlight or reinforce that arranged marriage is completely different from forced marriages. Sometimes they are mixed up, but they are completely different. Okay, to finish off global family forms, we're going to have a think about how sometimes the government intervenes with policies that influence family forms. The most famous example of this is China's one-child policy. The policy was introduced in 1979 to try to reduce the population growth, which was a result of a far too successful earlier campaign to increase the population in order to strengthen the army following World War II. The rule meant that families could only have one child, and if they broke the rule, there were financial consequences. Families who stuck to the rule were rewarded with things like higher salaries and pensions and benefits such as free healthcare. There were exceptions to the rule. For example, if you had a child with a disability, you were allowed to try for another. Boys were favoured as they carried on the family name and they looked after parents later in life. And this led to an increase in abortions based on gender, and many girls being abandoned as infants. The population policy was successful in the fact that it did slow down population growth, but it has left China with a legacy of a very imbalanced and ageing population. So we've now looked at global family forms, so let's move back to the UK. Traditionally, functionalists have argued that the nuclear family is the main and best form of family, but not everyone agrees. In the 1980s, sociologists Rona and Robert Rappaport put together the idea that families were becoming more diverse in contemporary UK and were moving away from one family form, and the nuclear family was just one of many family types. Some of the ways in which families are becoming more diverse is in how they are organised in terms of structure and the different roles between men and women, and in kinship patterns. So e.g. some families are lone parents while some families are extended. Trends as divorce, remarriage and cohabitation have all made family structures much more unpredictable, and they no longer follow set patterns. Anyway, we're going to have another round of altered vowels to remind ourselves of the ways that families are diverse according to the Rappaports. Okay, our first key term this time is... Okay, hopefully you spotted it. It is organisational. So organisational is all about different types of family structure. So for example, whether it's a single parent family, a reconstituted family, but it also refers to different kinship patterns and to the domestic division of labour. Okay, our next one is up on the screen now. Let's have a few moments to try and work it out. Okay, hopefully you spotted it was life course. The life course of individuals within families can really vary greatly, and this can reflect choice or circumstance. So it covers factors such as the number of children, the spacing of children, divorce, remarriage, widowhood, all of those sorts of things. So life events that take place within a family. Okay, our next one is a nice easy one. We'll give you a few moments just to try and work it out. Oh, excellent. Hopefully you worked out that it was class. So wealth and income have an obvious impact in terms of type of housing, room size, number, etc. Also financial problems in homes, how many holidays a family can take, and also whether families can actually have lots more children because they've got the money to do so. Our fourth one is, give yourself a couple of moments to try and work this one out. Okay, so this is cohort. So those people that are born in the same cohort were born in the same year. Like if we think about you in year 11 at the moment studying, you are part of a cohort of students. You're the 2022 exam cohort. So those born in the same cohort may have a shared experience of historical events, such as the introduction of comprehensive schools or the introduction of the birth control pill. These sorts of things would have an impact on families, particularly the introduction of the pill, which obviously helps with family planning. We have one more to go, and again we're going to give you a few moments to try and work out this one. Okay, so this is cultural and ethnic. So Britain is a really multi-ethnic society, and people from ethnic backgrounds who have migrated to the UK might follow the same customs and norms of the culture of their ethnic group and religion in terms of marriage and kinship. However, their children who have been born in the UK tend to meet up with alternative practices at school and in their neighbourhoods and in the media, and they might combine practices from both cultures when they form their families. So, for example, South Asian families tend to be extended, traditional and patriarchal. They've got much lower rates of separation and divorce, and they're much more likely to keep ties with their extended family. But younger born, British born members of this group are starting to buck this trend. Okay, we're going to think about the different sociological perspectives and what they think about family forms now. You've got 30 seconds to give me 3 benefits of the nuclear family according to functionalists. So we're going to test your recall skills on this one. Okay, off you go. So how did you get on? Let's have a look at the answers. Well, benefits of the nuclear family according to functionalists are primary socialisation. We've got emotional stability, so thinking about the warm bath theory, and we've got the idea of both male and female role models. So we're going to have a look at all of these in a bit more detail. Okay, so let's have a look at the nuclear family and the functionalist perspective on this. So in general, functionalists believe that family is an important institution and it's an agent of socialisation. And traditionally, they've argued that the nuclear family is the best form, particularly in terms of providing both male and female role models, which is important for primary socialisation. You should be familiar with the work of 2 functionalist sociologists in terms of the family. Firstly, G.P. Murdoch, who argued that the family provides 4 important functions: economic, providing resources and financial stability; education, socialising children in society's norms and values; emotional stability and sex, within marriage, i.e. not complete sexual freedom, which stabilises couples and therefore society; and reproduction, ensuring the new members of society. We've then got Talcott Parsons, who looked at primary socialisation, teaching children the shared norms and values of a society, but he also talked about stabilisation of adults, married couples providing comfort and emotional support for each other. He claimed a family was like a warm bath, providing relaxation from the strains and stresses of modern life. The husband, after a busy day at work, could have his stresses washed away. They both argued that the nuclear family was best for this, and that a clear division of labour in the family was needed to carry out these functions effectively, with men being more suited to being breadwinners and women more suited to being homemakers. So we should know that functionalism is a consensus theory, whereas feminism is a conflict theory. So in this case, we're going to have a look at feminism and how feminists might have issues with the nuclear family. So you have 30 seconds to try to come up with 3 issues that feminists might have with the nuclear family setup. Off you go. Okay, how many did you manage to get? Let's have a look at some answers. So issues with the nuclear family, according to feminists, are it reinforces the dual burden, the idea of canalisation, so giving toys that reinforce gender roles, and men benefiting more from a traditional family setup. So in a moment, we're going to look at these in a bit more detail. So let's think about the nuclear family from a feminist perspective. So feminist sociologist Anne Oakley also agreed on the idea of male and female role models, but didn't necessarily see it in such a positive light. She claimed the traditional family setup socialises children into future gender roles through canalisation, such as giving girls toys that would bring out their nurturing side, such as dolls. She also argued that women suffer the dual burden, taking on the majority of childcare and household tasks despite having paid work. Delphi and Leonard agreed and claimed that the family unit promotes a particular set of labour relations which benefit men and reinforce patriarchy, and claimed that men benefited far more from the family unit than women. We're going to finish this section by looking at a 12-mark question. The question is, discuss how far sociologists would agree that families in Britain today are symmetrical. We want you to consider Anne Oakley and the idea of the dual burden, Warmup and Young, who obviously came up with the theory of the symmetrical family, and the idea of new men and dual career families. So I'm going to give you some exam goal to get you thinking and help you write the best possible answer for this 12 marker. So the examiner is going to want to see a balanced argument presented, and you're going to need to back that up with concepts and theories to support the statement, along with evidence to argue against it. You will need to write and develop paragraphs throughout using sociological language, and you need to be able to analyse and evaluate relevant theories such as Warmup and Young's symmetrical family and change over time. You must have a conclusion at the end that offers a judgment which is supported by the evidence. So let's have a look at what we could include in this answer. Just remind ourselves of the question. It is discuss how far sociologists would agree that families today in Britain today are symmetrical. So you need to present arguments here, but then you need to evaluate those arguments to offer a counter argument. On the screen, our student argument is sociologists Warmup and Young argue for the symmetrical family where conjugal roles are shared equally between partners. You can back this up with evidence of how families have become symmetrical, thinking about how they've changed over time, and women now have careers and they don't have time to take responsibility for all the household chores as in the past. Obviously, it would be good here at this point to actually talk about what Warmup and Young's theory is. So what are conjugal roles and what does a symmetrical family actually mean? You then need to offer a criticism or a counter argument. Anne Oakley's work is the obvious go-to here, such as, so let's have a look at what's on the screen. Anne Oakley would disagree with this, citing the dual burden. She says that even when women go out to work outside of the home, they will still take on the biggest share of childcare and domestic chores. When you factor in emotional support, then women take on the triple shift, which is certainly not equal. And of course, don't forget to add that vital conclusion. But before you do that, you do need to offer a couple more paragraphs. So a 12 marker needs to be 2 paragraphs at least, probably 3. So we're looking for 3 arguments ideally. Okay, so let's move on to our second advanced information topic, and this time it is divorce. So the changes in the pattern of divorce in Britain since 1945 and the consequences of divorce for family members and structures. This includes the reasons for the increase in divorce, changes to legislation, consequences of divorce, and perspectives on divorce. So let's start by reminding ourselves what we actually mean by divorce. So divorce is a process by which 2 people legally terminate their marriage. Since the Divorce Reform Act, the number of divorces in the UK has risen dramatically, but as the number of marriages declines and people choose to get married later in life, this trend has begun to subside. Despite the current trend in decline of divorce rates, divorce has become more commonplace as part of contemporary family life. About 42% of all marriages end in divorce, and around a quarter of all UK households are lone parent families. Divorce can have lasting consequences on the individual, families and society as a whole, which we will consider later in this video. Previously, divorce wasn't a really viable option for women, but today around 70% of petitions for divorce come from women compared to only 37% in 1946, which we will also think about later. So we're going to start to think about why there has been an increase in divorce. So Anthony Giddens argued that in contemporary society, people sought out pure love as opposed to marriages of convenience or financial security. So consequently, people were more likely to petition for divorce if they fell out of love with their partner. He argued that nowadays couples have increased expectations. Couples want love, companionship and emotional satisfaction over economical stability, so are not prepared to remain in empty marriages like they may have done in previous generations. About divorce and the increase of dual earner families. So women are more likely to be financially independent than in previous generations, so are more able to leave partners who do not meet their emotional needs. They're more likely to have well-paid careers now, so they don't need to stay married for financial stability and can support themselves after a divorce. Women can also afford to bring up children alone, as they might be entitled to support from the welfare state, such as working tax credits and universal support. But legally, fathers are required to support their children financially. Again, all of these give women financial freedom that they didn't have in the past. So let's think about divorce and secularisation. Marriage was a religious institution for a long period of time, and people who were divorced were viewed negatively. The process of secularisation, by which people are guided by individual morals rather than morals of their religion, has meant less religious significance is placed on marriage, and over half of first-time marriages are civil ceremonies. Divorce is not seen as shameful like it was in the past, which has meant people are free to divorce without fear or guilt. It also means that couples are no longer staying together for appearance's sake or for the sake of the children. Most Christians nowadays accept that it is damaging for children to live in an unhappy home. Divorce and life expectancy. With people living longer, they are less likely to remain in an unhappy marriage into the later years. People choose to divorce as they may be unwilling to spend the next 20 or 30 years of their lives with somebody they are no longer happy with, whereas previously this may have been a much shorter period. People might also see this longer life expectancy as an opportunity to get a second chance of happiness. Perhaps that second marriage will last longer than the first. So let's have a look at the role of change in legislation. The 1857 Matrimonial Causes Act allowed ordinary people to divorce. Before then, divorce was largely open only to men and had to be granted by an Act of Parliament, which was hugely expensive and therefore only open to the rich. Under the new law, women divorcing on the grounds of adultery not only had to prove their husbands had been unfaithful, but also had to prove additional faults, which included cruelty, rape, and incest. A private member's bill in 1923 made it easier for women to petition for divorce for adultery, but it did still have to be proved. In 1937, the law was changed and divorce was allowed on other grounds, including drunkenness, insanity, and desertion. In 1949, legal aid was made available to those on low incomes, which made divorce more affordable. However, the biggest change was the Divorce Reform Act of 1969, which meant that it was easier for people to obtain a divorce. Proof of adultery or physical or mental cruelty were reasons for divorce prior to the Act, but a further category that required less physical proof, which was irretrievable breakdown, was added, meaning that the relationship was broken down and could not be mended. The couple had to be married for at least 3 years and needed to be able to prove evidence of the relationship breakdown. This saw a rise in divorces as many people found that their situation fitted this criteria and they didn't have to blame each other or prove their partner's guilt. Divorce was available after 2 years of agreed separation or 5 years if one partner did not agree. In 1984, another law was introduced to allow divorce to be granted after 1 year of marriage. By contrast, the 1996 family law tried to slow down proceedings. It moved the need for evidence of breakdown, but introduced a compulsory period of reconciliation and reflection, 9 months of a statement of breakdown and 15 months if there were children. An appeal court ruling in 2007 ruled that in divorce, the principle of equality applies. The starting point of a split was 50-50 of all assets, including salaries and pension rights. No-fault divorces are now set to come into effect. This means that couples will be able to get divorced without one person needing to lay the blame on another. Under these new laws, couples will be able to get divorced solely on the basis that marriage is broken down without needing to cite one of the 5 reasons for divorce as currently required. Those 5 reasons are adultery, unreasonable behaviour, such as physical violence, verbal abuse, substance misuse, or financial irresponsibility, such as failing to contribute to household costs. Desertion, where one person leaves the marital home without the other one agreeing. You could apply for a divorce 2 years after this. 2-year separation with the consent of both sides. A 5-year separation, which doesn't require consent. But this means that the couple agrees to divorce and the divorce is amicable or uncontested. There won't be a requirement for one person to blame the other for the breakdown of the marriage. Under current laws, one spouse needs to issue divorce proceedings against the other, and the person who starts the divorce is called the petitioner and the other person is called the respondent. Under the no-fault divorce system, both people will be able to make the application jointly. The end of a marriage can be an emotional time for 2 partners. However, divorce can have an impact on more than just the 2 people that were married in the first place. We're going to use a connection spinner to consider the impacts of divorce on different groups of people. Okay, let's give the spinner a spin and see where it is going to end up. Okay, we have partners in relationships. So on embarking on a new relationship, partners are probably much happier as they've left an unhappy marriage, although obviously this does depend on the circumstances. The legal process of divorce can be very stressful and also expensive, and the divorce might lead to financial difficulties after the splitting of assets, selling homes, etc. But they may also have to deal with co-parenting whilst not on good terms, custody battles with children, disagreement on parenting, and all sorts of other things. Okay, let's spin the wheel again and see where we land. Okay, we have new partners. So it can be difficult for new partners. They have to take on the baggage of a partner's previous relationship, particularly if that divorce is messy and not amicable, and they might find themselves being step parents when they didn't necessarily want to be. Okay, we're not going to spin again, but let's have a quick look at the others. So often friends are lost following a divorce. Sometimes this is due to people taking sides. Sometimes it's down to the lack of focus on retaining friendships when going through such a stressful life event. People going through divorce sometimes end up losing their extended families, for example, their in-laws, people that might have been part of their family for 20 years. Children have to get used to life moving between two homes. They might have to move out of the family home because it might have to be sold. There's upheaval. They might be upset at spending less time with both parents, but they might also be relieved after a period of conflict in the home. But also these children might have to navigate a new role as stepchildren, trying to get used to mum or dad's new partner and their children, which can be really distressing. So we're now going to have a look at what the different sociological perspectives think of a divorce. So we'll start off with functionalism. Functionalism, as it has a more positive outlook on society, has often been criticised for ignoring family dysfunction at the expense of viewing society through rose-tinted specs. However, generally, functionalists believe divorce is a way out of an unhappy marriage and the chance to start again. Some functionalists have addressed the rise of divorce and the impact it has on society, while many would suggest that divorce is a sign that the norms and values of marriage are decaying. So Fletcher argues, for example, that the increase in the divorce rate demonstrates that norms and values and expectations are evolving, and the increased divorce rate is a sign of people place a higher value on marriage than they had previously. And this supports the ideas of Giddens on the idea of people searching for pure love rather than settling for stability and security. What do Marxists think then? Well, they see the failure of marriage as being down to the stresses and strains of a capitalist society. Hart suggested that the increase in divorce rate in the early 70s was due to the crisis of capitalism at the start of the decade, suggesting the need for dual earner families was because of massive inflation, which created a dual burden for women. Zaretsky also suggests that the strains on women from acting as a release for the tension of workers' frustrations contributes to marital problems, i.e. the idea of a man having a unfulfilling or stressful day at work and coming home and taking it out on his wife. Feminists, in particular liberal feminists, have long advocated change to the law to enable women to have equality in their relationships and the option to leave relationships if they choose. Some radical feminists have suggested that divorce laws in the past have acted as a form of prison for women who are abused physically, emotionally and sexually by their partners, and unequal access to financial support led to many women remaining in unhappy and dysfunctional relationships. However, the rise in divorces and the increase in women petitioning for divorce, with 2 out of 3 divorces being requested by women, has been the result of the feminist movement in challenging the patriarchal control of the family unit. The last perspective is the new right view on divorce. So the new right see divorce as threatening the future of the nuclear family and causing an increase in what they view as inadequate and inferior families, seeing the nuclear family of 2 parents and their children as the proper and best family form. New right sociologists such as Charles Murray argue that divorce leads to an increase in lone parent families and that lone parent families are the cause of most of society's problems. The new right support their disapproval of divorce with evidence which suggests that children from lone parent families are more likely to fail at school and are more likely to be involved with crime. They also argue that boys brought up without a male role model in the family will not see fatherly behaviour to aspire to, nor understand what the role of men is, i.e. to work and provide money for the family, claiming that in the future boys brought up by single mothers will be unlikely to take responsibility for any children that they have. The new right also argue that changes to the marriage law, such as the Divorce Reform Act and cheap divorces, have made divorce far too easy. Basic fees for a divorce, if a couple doesn't need to go to court, can be less than £120. They argue that couples rush into divorce without trying to see if they could make things work out. And they also argue that the ease of divorce makes some people rush into a marriage in the first place without taking the commitment seriously or being sure that they're making the right choice because they know they can change their mind later. So we're going to finish this section by looking at a 12-mark question. Discuss how far sociologists would agree that changes in the law have led to an increase in the divorce rate since the 1970s. So in this answer you would need to consider the legal changes, but also some opposing arguments, so alternative arguments, alternative viewpoints here. The decline of religion, increasing women's independence and prioritising love over security are all things that you could write about in this answer. Okay, so we have some exam gold again to try and get you to write those magnificent answers. So an examiner is going to want to see that balanced argument. So you are going to once again need to back up your ideas, concepts and theories that support the statement, along with evidence to argue against it. So that offering that alternative viewpoint. You need to write and develop paragraphs, you need to use sociological language, and you need to be able to analyse and evaluate those laws as well as relevant theories. So the idea, for example, of Giddens' idea of romantic love. You then also have to have a conclusion that offers out judgment that is supported by evidence within your essay. Let's have a look at what we could include here. Our question is, discuss how far sociologists would agree that changes in the law have led to an increase in the divorce rate since the 1970s. So you need to present arguments that support this idea, but then you need to evaluate those arguments and present alternative viewpoints. So on the screen, our student has argued this point. The Divorce Reform Act of 1969 meant it was easier for people to obtain a divorce. You can then back this up by explaining how the Divorce Reform Act has made divorce easier. So this is adding strength to that point. So on the screen we have written, up until this point you had to prove adultery or mental cruelty, which was difficult to prove. The Divorce Reform Act introduced a new ground for divorce, which was irretrievable breakdown, and covered many more factors such as physical abuse, drug and alcohol use, and was much easier to prove. So don't forget, as we are evaluating, you will need to have a counter-argument or offer a different viewpoint here. Now, we know that the law has made it easier. We can't argue against that. So we need to refer back to the question. Again, let's remind you of that question. Discuss how far sociologists would agree the changes in the law have led to an increase in the divorce rate since the 1970s. And think about the other things that have increased the rate of divorce aside from legal changes. So let's have a look at an alternative view of this point. So while this is true, there are many other factors which have led to an increase in divorce, such as the decline of religion. Divorce is not seen as shameful like it was in the past, which has meant people are free for divorce without fear or guilt. It also means that couples are no longer staying together for the sake of the children, and most Christians accept it's damaging for the children to live in an unhappy home. So you should be able to talk about a couple of alternatives. You need to be able to do that again. So perhaps then write a paragraph about the increasing independence and financial security of women. And don't forget to talk about sociological perspectives somewhere in your answers, as the statement does refer to that. And then don't forget that conclusion where you refer back to your statement. Is changes to the law the most important factor, or is it one of the other things that you have offered as an alternative view? Which one do you think is the most convincing argument? Anyway, well done. If I was you, I would go and have a go at this question in preparation for Monday's exam. So well done if you've made it right to the end. In this video, we've covered in detail the advanced information topics for families, which will hopefully help you to increase your confidence before going into that exam on Monday. Don't forget to watch the warm-up video for education as well, and keep an eye out for paper 2. The videos on crime and deviance and social stratification will be available to you very shortly. Good luck.